Under the gray sky of Harvard, the cold wind swept through the ancient stone walls of Widener Lecture Hall, carrying the musty scent of time and untold secrets. In the vast room with rows of worn wooden seats, a battle of ideologies was about to erupt. Not between unknown scholars, but between two men bearing scars and opposing desires. Professor Richard Hargrove, once a celebrated historian but now deemed a traitor to the faith, prepared to step onto the podium. With his silver hair tangled like cobwebs and eyes sharp as a blade, he was the nightmare of anyone who dared to believe in anything beyond cold reason. Facing him unexpectedly was Elon Musk, the eccentric billionaire, the tech genius, a man who carried within him questions that stretched far beyond the horizon of science. Musk had not come to debate. He had merely intended to stop by before his speech at a conference on the future of humanity, but fate has its own way of arranging things. Hargrove was no ordinary man. Born into a devout Christian family in Alabama, he had once knelt for hours before the altar, whispering prayers until his lips went numb. But the death of his mother, a tragic car accident that he believed God had turned his back on, shattered his faith into pieces. From then on, he plunged into history like a relentless hunter, using every ancient text to prove that Jesus, the idol of billions, was nothing more than a phantom conjured by ignorance. To him, Christianity was not merely a mistake, it was a crime. Musk was different. He was not a church devotee, did not wear a cross, nor did he read the Bible every night. But in that sharp mind of his, he always left a door slightly ajar for mysteries that science had yet to grasp. To Musk, Jesus was not just a historical figure to be verified. He was a grand question, a phenomenon worth delving into. And today, as the lecture hall doors swung open, these two men would collide like two meteors, one seeking to burn the past, the other seeking to illuminate the future. What would happen when an enemy of faith faced a seeker of truth? Would flames ignite or would ashes settle? Professor Richard Hargrove stepped onto the podium, his slightly hunched figure exuding an overwhelming aura. His wrinkled gray vest and glasses slipping down his nose could not hide the razor-sharp gaze in his eyes. He scanned the lecture hall, observing each student's face like a general inspecting his troops before battle. His dry cough echoed, cutting through the steady sound of rain outside the window, and then he began, his voice deep yet authoritative, each word landing like a hammer strike. Young people, it is time we confront the truth and cast aside these foolish myths. Religion, especially Christianity, has shackled humanity in darkness for centuries. And at the heart of this mess lies Jesus Christ. Let me be clear so there is no misunderstanding. Jesus was nothing more than a creation of imagination, a fairy tale inflated to control the masses, to lull the weak into complacency, and to manipulate the gullible. He paused, letting his words seep into the air. A few students lowered their heads, awkwardly taking notes, while others watched him with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. Hargrove smirked, a self-satisfied smile he often used to provoke. He liked this feeling. The thrill of stirring, challenging, shattering what others held sacred. Don't get me wrong, he continued, his tone laced with sharp sarcasm. I know this might hurt some of you, those who grew up with stories of the Savior walking on water, turning water into wine, or rising from the dead. But wake up. The truth is as clear as daylight. There is no credible historical evidence proving that Jesus Christ, and as described in the Bible, ever existed. He was a product of a chaotic era, a fabricated tale to comfort the desperate and consolidate power for the ruler. At the back of the hall, Elon Musk sat still, his hands clasped, his eyes burning with intensity as he watched Hargrove's every move. He had no intention of speaking, not yet. Musk was not one to engage in religious debates. He was a scientist, a pragmatist, a dreamer who believed in the power of reason and discovery. But there was something in Hargrove's tone, the absolute arrogance, the way he dismissed everything with a mere wave of his hand that stirred a deep discomfort within Musk. He leaned forward, listening more intently, as if analyzing a complex equation that demanded an answer. Hargrove's lecture continued for several more minutes, filled with sharp arguments about how religious texts had been distorted over time, how Christianity had exploited Jesus as a political tool to impose authority. When he finished, scattered applause broke the silence, but the atmosphere remained heavy, as if weighed down by an invisible stone. Students began packing up their books, preparing to leave. Hargrove stood on the podium, arms crossed, his self-satisfied gaze sweeping over the crowd like a king surveying his conquered battlefield. But then, from the back of the room, a deep and clear voice rang out, slicing through the silence like a sharp blade. "Excuse me, Professor Hargrove, I think you're wrong." Every head turned. Elon Musk stood up, his demeanor calm, but his eyes blazing like an unquenchable fire. A wave of murmurs spread among the students, excitement mixed with astonishment filling the air. Hargrove frowned, his fingers tightening around the edge of the podium, his gaze flickering with unmasked irritation. "Mr. Musk, I didn't take you for someone interested in fairy tales. What do you want? Sell me a dream powered by lithium batteries?" Musk stepped forward, not smiling, his voice steady but as sharp as steel. "I'm not selling anything, but I just heard you call Jesus a delusion. You're wrong. Dead wrong. Dismissing him like that isn't science. It's arrogance disguised as reason. You think you know everything, but you're blinding yourself." Hargrove chuckled dryly, a laugh dripping with contempt, as if he had just heard a dull joke. "Arrogance? Mr. Musk, I have spent 3 decades dissecting history, overturning every page of theological study to expose the lies of Christianity, and you're an engineer, a dreamer about Mars, a billionaire who enjoys attention. What do you know about Jesus beyond the bedtime stories the masses whisper to themselves?" Musk stepped closer, his gaze unwavering, locked onto Hargrove's with unshakable intensity. "I don't need the Bible to see that you're wrong. You say there's no evidence? Tacitus wrote about a man named Jesus who was executed under Pilate. Josephus recorded him as a troublemaker, a real person, flesh and blood. These were historians, not priests. How do you explain that? Were they making things up, or are you just cherry-picking what fits your narrative?" Hargrove smirked, his eyes flashing like a cornered beast. "Tacitus, Josephus, you bring up those names as if they were undeniable treasures? Those records were written decades after Jesus' supposed death, and who's to say they weren't distorted, stuffed with fabrications by later fanatics? You think I haven't heard this cheap argument before, Mr. Musk? You're just an amateur wrapped in the guise of wisdom, parroting the hollow justifications of those who defend the faith." "I'm not defending faith, Professor. I'm defending the truth. The very thing you claim to worship yet are so willing to strangle when it doesn't fit your framework. You demand absolute evidence for Jesus? Then do you have direct proof of Cleopatra's death? Or of Alexander's victory at Gaugamela? No, you rely on records just as I do. If you dismiss Jesus simply because these sources aren't perfect, then you'd have to erase nearly all of ancient history from textbooks. Are you willing to do that? Or do you just cherry-pick facts to serve your own ego?" The room erupted in murmurs, students looking at each other, some nodding, drawn into Musk's airtight argument. Hargrove slammed his hand down on the podium, his face flushed red, his voice rising into a roar. "Don't compare Jesus to Cleopatra or Alexander. Cleopatra has a tomb. Alexander has victories recorded even by his enemies. And Jesus? All you have are a few vague lines from people who lived a generation after him, along with a pile of absurd miracles, walking on water, rising from the dead. Are you seriously telling me to believe in those cheap magic tricks, Mr. Musk? Do you take me for a fool?" "I'm not asking you to believe in miracles, Professor. I'm not here to prove that Jesus was the Son of God or that he truly rose from the dead. I'm telling you not to throw history into the trash just because you despise the supernatural aspects tied to it. Tacitus didn't write about miracles. He wrote about a man who was executed, a real man. Josephus wasn't praising God. He was documenting a movement that existed. You want to mock walking on water? Fine, but completely denying Jesus' existence, calling him a fairy tale, is an insult to the very reason you claim to champion. You're not the scientist here. You're a fanatic in love with your own skepticism." Hargrove let out a sharp, scornful laugh, but his hands trembled, betraying the unease rising within him. "Fanatic? You dare call me a fanatic? You stand here, defending a figure known only through fantastical stories, and you dare speak of reason? Mr. Musk, you build rockets. You dream of Mars. Why don't you leave this Jesus nonsense to the ignorant believers and return to your science? That's where you belong." Musk took a deep breath, his voice lowering, but each word landed like a hammer blow. "Science and faith are not enemies, Professor, unless you force them to be. You think I know nothing about religion? I have read the Bible. I have studied history, not because I needed to believe, but because I needed to understand. And what I see is that a man named Jesus left an imprint so deep that it shaped our entire civilization. You can scoff at miracles, but you cannot deny the power of the ideas he spread. Love, compassion, forgiveness. That is not a fairy tale. That is a reality that changed the world. You dismiss it because it doesn't fit your formula, then you are not a scientist. You are a destroyer of truth. Hargrove nearly roared, his voice cracking under the weight of his fury. Changed the world? You mean ruined it? If Jesus was real, then he was the root of religious wars, of the Inquisition, of centuries of oppression in the name of God. You call that love? I call it a catastrophe, one that humanity has yet to escape from. Musk shook his head, his voice now cold as ice, but sharp as steel. You blame Jesus for what people have done with his message. If he was real, he preached forgiveness, not war. He taught love, not oppression. You want to burn him at the stake of history for the sins of others? Then you must also burn science, for the atomic bomb, for chemical weapons, for every invention turned into a tool of destruction. Corrupted ideas do not make them false, Professor. You want the truth? The truth is that you are afraid that Jesus might be real, and that would shatter the neat little world you've built inside your mind. Hargrove trembled with rage, but he forced himself to maintain a composed tone, though cracks were beginning to show. Afraid? You think I fear a fairy tale? Mr. Musk, you are good at building rockets, but you know nothing of history. Jesus, if he ever existed, was just a minor rebel executed by the Romans, then exaggerated into a god by his followers. You expect me to accept that as truth? You expect me to kneel before a ghost of the past? Musk took another step forward, his gaze piercing through Hargrove. I'm not telling you to kneel before anyone, Professor. I'm telling you to open your eyes. You think faith is weakness? You think billions of people believe in Jesus because they're ignorant? Or maybe, just maybe, they found something in his message that your science cannot replace? I'm not saying Christianity is right about everything. I'm not saying the Bible is science. But I am saying that rejecting it entirely, calling it a myth, is arrogance. The arrogance of someone who thinks they have understood everything about this universe, from the stars in the sky to the depths of the human heart. Hargrove slammed his hand down on the podium once more, his voice rising, almost shouting. Arrogance. You dare call me arrogant. I am the defender of reason, the one who stands against superstition and deceit. And you stand here making excuses for a man the world only knows through fantastical stories, a man who claimed to be the Son of God, a man whose followers insist defeated death. Do you believe in that? Mr. Musk, do you believe Jesus actually rose from the dead? Or are you just a hypocrite defending a story you don't even have the courage to believe in yourself? Musk paused, his gaze contemplative, as if looking into a distant void. Silence fell over the lecture hall, stretched tight like a string about to snap. Then he spoke, his voice low but firm. I am not here to declare my personal beliefs, Professor. I don't know if Jesus was divine. I don't have the data to prove it, and I won't pretend that I do. But I know that life is more than what we can measure or explain with formulas. I believe in the power of ideas, and Jesus had ideas that changed the world, stronger than any rocket I've ever built, stronger than any theory you've ever written. You can call it a myth, but it is a living myth, a myth that shaped our history, our laws, our morality. You deny that? You deny the very foundation of the society you live in. Hargrove opened his mouth, but for the first time in his career, he found no immediate rebuttal. His voice, when it finally came, was smaller, trembling, as if he were battling himself. Then what do you want, Mr. Musk? Do you want me to bow before Jesus? Do you want me to abandon science and pray for miracles? Do you want me to live in delusion like the masses out there? Musk took one final step, now standing directly in front of the podium, looking straight into Hargrove's eyes. I don't want you to bow before anyone, Professor. I want you to be open. Science is a magnificent tool for understanding the physical world, but it does not have all the answers, and it never will. Faith, philosophy, history, these are other ways of exploring what science cannot touch. Jesus, whether real or not, left behind a message that billions have found meaning in. You may not believe in miracles, but you cannot deny the power of that idea. To reject it simply because you cannot measure it with a ruler, that is not reason, that is cowardice. The entire hall fell into silence. a heavy stillness as if the air itself had stopped moving. Musk's final words hung over everyone, sharp and undeniable, like a blade cutting straight to the bone. Hargrove stood there, his hands still gripping the edge of the podium, but his eyes were no longer razor-sharp as before. They wavered, like a lake disturbed by a single stone. For the first time in his life, he felt the foundation of his worldview, solid as granite, beginning to crack. He said nothing more, only turned his face away, looking out the window where raindrops slid quietly down the glass, as if they were weeping for the shattered beliefs within him. In that moment, memories flooded back. The image of young Richard kneeling before the altar in Alabama, his trembling hands clutching a wooden cross, his lips whispering prayers he believed would save his mother. But his mother had died, and with her death, he had buried God, buried Jesus, buried every hope in something greater than reason. He had turned that pain into a weapon, wielding it to pierce the faith of others, to prove that the world needed no miracles. Perhaps, just perhaps, he would begin again, not to destroy, but to understand. The rain began to ease, as if the sky itself had found peace after the storm. And somewhere, within the ancient stone walls of Harvard, a new seed had been planted. A seed of doubt, of openness, and of a search that had never truly ended. The debate did not end with a winner or a loser. It left behind a silence, not the silence of defeat, but the space for contemplation, for seeds of doubt and new awareness to take root. Professor Richard Hargrove did not crumble, but his gaze no longer carried the absolute certainty it once did. Elon Musk did not seek to convince, but he planted a question powerful enough to shake what once seemed unshakable. And perhaps the most important thing was not who was right or wrong, but how each person confronted their own beliefs. We often think that science and faith are opposing battle lines, but maybe they are just two different paths leading to a greater truth, one that humanity has been striving to uncover for generations. So what about you? If you stood in that room caught between cold reason and unanswered questions, what would you choose? Would you dare to re-examine what you have always believed, whether in science or in faith? Share your thoughts below because perhaps this debate is far from over. Subscribe to the channel and let us know if you want to hear the next story.